Attention, here's an update on tonight's dinner. It was veal. I repeat, veal. The winner of tonight's Mystery Meat Contest is Jeffrey Corbin, who guessed some kind of beef.
So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is the Mr. Media Interview, recorded live on blogtalkradio.com on June 16th, 2008. My parents never sent me away to camp, summer camp that is, or frankly, any other camp. I don't blame them. As a kid, I was afraid of my own shadow, easily got car sick, and was not well adjusted socially. That's just the truth. And after reading Roger Bennett's new love letter to summer camps called Camp Camp, I'm pretty sure I would have hated sleepaway camps. Now, that said, I found reading it to be great fun. And I think my own kid, now approaching the age where sleepaway camp is being discussed, would love it. Now, speaking of kids, this is my first Mr. Media interview where I've been on high maternity alert. My guest wife was due to give birth last week, but hasn't yet. So if Roger Bennett has to leave suddenly, I'll just read from his book to fill the time, okay? So, in just a moment, we hope...
He's a sex machine.
Are you kidding me?
Well, I went out with him one night, and he got us 6 nurses by himself, and 4 of them couldn't report to work the next morning.
Well, now, I have to be honest with you. I'm waiting for Roger to call in. He should be on the phone any minute now. So I'm going to stall. I'm hoping that his wife is not in labor right now, but I'm just hoping she's not in labor right now. Let me read you a little bit from Camp Camp. And if you're following on the webcam, here's the cover of the book. I'm holding it up right now. One of the sections in the book is about the counselors, some of the people who actually worked at camp. Here's an example. Gary Walensky was our tennis counselor, a larger-than-life figure who would come onto court in roller skates and in drag. We had T-shirts that said Gary's Girls. We left camp one summer, and he was all over television and even on Inside Edition. He had kidnapped someone he taught, and the police chased him to a dungeon lair where he shot himself dead wearing one of his drag outfits. All the props that we had found so cute were found in the lair. I mean, I just, again, I'm feeling pretty good that I didn't go to sleepaway camp when I read something like that. All right, we're still waiting for Roger to call in. Let me find you something else here. Incidentally, the introduction to this book was written by Ivan Reitman, who is the director of the movie Meatballs, and you might recognize some of the clips I'm playing during the show because that's where they come from.
Attention campers, arts and crafts has been canceled due to bad taste. All junior girls are now junior boys, and Nurse DeMarco says that the raccoon fever epidemic is officially over. Hey, you, on the water chain.
I love Bill Murray. So let me read you from the foreword by Ivan Reitman, the director of that movie. He says, between the ages of 7 and 15, going to summer camp was the most important influence in my life. The opportunity to be away from my parents and live with a gang of kids in the country was the perfect way to spend a summer. I honestly believe that I would not have the life or career I now have had I not gone to camp. It was at camp that I started my first band, acted in a play, competed in group sports, and learned that one can actually talk to members of the opposite sex. The movie Meatballs came about virtually by accident. The idea for the film came to me shortly after the first screening of National Lampoon's Animal House. You know what? There's Roger. Hold on. Hello? Hi. Yes, Roger? Okay, I'm back. Roger is calling in. There was some confusion over the day. So let me finish reading from Ivan Reitman while he calls in here. The movie Meatballs came about virtually by accident. The idea for the film came to me shortly after the first screening of National Lampoon's Animal House. It was clear from the screening that the film was destined to be a success. I called up my old friends Dan Goldberg and Len Bloom and suggested that we create a movie about summer camp based on our personal experiences. All right, I believe we have Roger Bennett joining us on the phone right now. Roger, are you
Hi,
there?
Bob, I am, indeed.
Hi, Roger. I apologize for any confusion.
I'm delighted to be on the show.
Well, happy to have you here. When I did the introduction a moment ago, I mentioned that your wife was a little overdue, that she was due last week. I was afraid when you didn't call in that maybe she was in labor.
I wish that were the case, but I recommend to everybody listening to bring out a book the same week as you were due to have a child. It makes everything double the fun. But I'm happy to be with you and delighted to be able to talk about the book.
How is your wife, we should ask?
She is fabulous. I think today hopefully is the day, and I will fill everybody in. I'll leave it to you to fill everybody in later, but this is a wonderful, it's a delight to be on your show. I've listened to it faithfully for the past year, and this is my number one priority.
Well, thank you. I'll take number 2 priority under the circumstances.
We'll call the baby Bob, whether it's a boy or a girl. How's that sound?
You do that. You do that. That would be great. It's actually amazing that the baby has managed to stay so content in the womb when all this incredible stuff has been happening to you. You mentions in Entertainment Weekly, Newsweek, and Rolling Stone, and all that just in the last week.
Well, the response to the book, I think, reflects the dear place that the summer camp has in the hearts and minds of literally thousands of people across the country. In doing the book, we started a website and asked people for their tall tales and photographs from that time and place. And we were overwhelmed by the response. We got over 80,000 photographs and interviewed 300 bunkmates and former bunkmates who were still in deep connection. And in doing so, kind of uncovered a nation of Americans who, on the surface, have managed to develop normal-seeming lives as lawyers, doctors, accountants, hedge fund investors, and the like. But underneath the surface, we're still waiting for the color war cannon to go off at any second and return to that time and place. And I think the response to the book is a reflection of the passion that people have for summer camp.
Yeah, I mean, what is it? You didn't hear the introduction, I guess, but I mentioned that. I mean, I never went to summer camp, so and in my own case, it was probably the right move. But I mean, people who've gone, I guess they get all misty-eyed talking about it, and you clearly had no problem finding people to talk about it. Why is that?
I think that we did a book 3 years ago called Bonnets for Disco, which was a similar creation, inviting people to send in their photographs, tell us their stories, and using the bar or bat mitzvah of the 1980s as a prism to look at our generation, the music we listened to, the clothes we wore, and the whole adolescent experience. And we learned in doing so, and no big surprise, that the bar mitzvah was a cruel trick that was perpetrated upon our generation when we were told that we were men or women overnight, almost arbitrarily, even though many of us were still light years away from puberty. And I think for many people, the book is a sequel because summer camp really was the place where they truly came of age. Their parents were taken out of the equation. They left their homes, their normal lives, their reputations in high school, and had a chance to make a do-over and to be the person that they always wanted to be. If they wanted to be a ladies' man or a cut-up or a great athlete, whatever it was, or a stylish dresser, in the cabin in that summer camp, they had a chance to really remake themselves, be who they want to be, and enter this incredible world. We realized every camp, and there's thousands of them, Bob, we realized every camp was a compressed universe, a world of its own with its own rhythms and traditions. But the one thing that was constant was that almost every day, hundreds of kids would be having firsts of every kind, whether it was learning to shoot a basketball, swim the backstroke, or get to third base. Everybody was vying to do all of those daytime, probably athletically, nighttime athletically, but in a very different way within their sexual petri dish, which was summer camp.
I heard, just by coincidence, the last 2 or 3 weeks, I think, I heard Howard Stern on Sirius Radio talking about his summer camp memories, and it was right along the lines of what you mentioned. I mean, he apparently loved going to camp, and what he seemed to especially love was that he could be someone else when he went to camp, that he could put away who he was back in Roosevelt, Long Island. All the kids that he went to school with knew him as, and he'd go to camp, and suddenly he could in his mind he could be a stud, and he could actually be the stud. He would get all the girls, and you know, when he went from being a camper then became a counselor, you know, he could lay this wisdom on the kids. But when he'd go back to Roosevelt, he was back to who he was, and none of that was happening for him. Yeah, I mean, we heard that over and over and over again in terms of the interviews we did, where both girls and boys would say that the nighttime was the right time at summer camp for a bit of physical exploration. I think for the boys, there was a gentleman who talked about a guy called Mark Boxer. He said, we're very open in our bunk. First times were always up for discussion. We were all trying, we all knew it. Success and failure could be debated in an atmosphere of frank exchange for the common good. Did you succeed or not? As you listened to all of your friends report in, the sense of pressure was immense, especially if the person who got into third base was not as cool as you. The whole thing was a massive collective experiment and a respectful competition at the same time. So for the boys, it was a learning curve. And we heard the same for the girls, that this was an opportunity for 2 months to literally try a new thing with a new person almost every night, and still return home to your hometown and have your carefully curated reputation remain intact. Because what happened at camp before the era of Facebook and MySpace, it stayed in that place, in that hallowed ground. And as one of the girls said, at night time, as you lay in your bunk whispering about what you'd done that night, she said it was so intimate, the voices in the darkness of night, she said it felt like church, was how she described it. So I think for both boys and girls alike, even if you in high school had a reputation that would prevent you from being mildly attractive to the opposite sex, that was irrelevant. Once you got to camp, you could spray on a little high karate aftershave, you could put on some Esprit clothing, the Prada of the 1980s, and you could attack every evening with the kind of confidence as if you really did have a great game.
I want you guys to go out there and protect your balls at any cost.
That's, of course, Bill Murray as Tripper in the movie Meatballs. Now, I play that now. I've got a few more of those. You landed a very big fish to write the introduction to your book, Ivan Reitman, the director of Meatballs. How did he get involved?
Well, it was an incredible honor. He is a demigod. And so when we're piecing this project together, it became increasingly clear that it could only be him, because the movie Meatballs, which I think is one of the finest pieces of cinematography that Hollywood has ever produced. I say that somewhat.
You love your summer camp, don't you?
I say that somewhat flippantly, but the thing that made me laugh was so many people talked about their camp experiences, about raiding, about panty raids, about trying to reach the other side and the other side of camp. And they said at the end of the summer, it felt as if they'd invented every kind of trick, every kind of trespass, every type of breaking the boundaries, only to watch on video in those days, only to watch a video of Ivan Reitman's movie and realize that he'd invented everything years before them. So not only does it document faithfully, I think, the vibe of the time and the place that we look at in this book, which is a bygone era already, the time that we have looked at in this book. The modern reality is already kind of far outstripped it, but he captured that vibe beautifully, but in doing so influenced a generation of campers to kind of follow his lead. So we have a lot to him to be grateful for, and we were delighted to receive his kind of blessing, the equivalent of the Good Housekeeping seal of approval at the beginning of the book. And the story is very simple. Just like only the village people could do the introduction for Bar Mitzvah Disco, it had to be them. It quite simply had to be them. It could only be Ivan Reitman for us for this book, and thank God he was really amenable and was just wonderful to work with.
I imagine that in the closed culture of each camp, and of course, as you say, there are thousands of camps, that because they're young people that are there, they always think that they invent everything year after year. They're the first to do it. Right? Am I wrong about that?
No, I think it's a core component of summer camp, and one of the reasons we loved it, because the book is about summer camp, and it's not about summer camp at all, Bob, to us. It really is a prism to look at the history of our generation and the adolescent experience. And I think a core part of becoming coming of age is testing boundaries and pushing limits. And camp was all about that. There's a thing at camp, and if you weren't a camper, it may not be familiar to you, but called the raid, which is after curfew at night time when everybody was supposed to have heads on pillows. It was traditional that a number of kids would creep out of their bunk and try and raid the women's side and the girls' side, vice versa. And one person, raiders were raiders in their blood. They loved it. They loved the thrill, the adrenaline rush, experimenting with trespass. And then one of the guys we interviewed said that every night was a raiding night. But on the day before parents came up, it's a rite of the summer called Visiting Day. The camp director would make an announcement after dinner where he'd say, guys, everyone knows it's Visiting Day tomorrow. Tonight, no raiding. Raiding's off limits. And he said that was one of the most dispiriting nights of the summer for him, because he realized that at the end of the day, everyone was able to raid and test boundaries only because the camp director let them raid and test boundaries. And at the end of the day, even the trespass, even the breaking of boundaries was supported by and known to the camp director. And at the end of the day, you got away with nothing.
Jeez. Hey, I want to give out our phone number. I'm hoping maybe we'll have some people call in and want to talk to you, or maybe share some of their own summer camp stories. So if you are one of those people, give us a call, 646-595-3135. And, of course, as always, only call in if you're listening live today, June 16th. Were you surprised? You have, it seems like a fairly equal number of stories in the book from boys and girls. Of course, now they're grown men and women. Were you surprised as a man to see the women send in their stories, particularly relating to their sexual adventures?
Honestly, nothing surprises me. As I said, we did this book, Bonnets for Disco, a couple of years ago, and in doing it, we realized that there's what we call a statute of limitations on shame. And stories which once were probably rather mortifying for us when we were 13, 14, 15 and 16. Now people are in their late 20s, early 30s. I think the people have moved on, can reopen the photo albums and the stories that they trigger. And although they were often kind of mortifying, and a number of these stories are mortifying, this is not a rose-tinted look at summer camp. I think it captures it, both the rough and the smooth, the joys and the tortures. But we realise that people are willing to and excited to talk about both. And I think the response to this has broken down equally according to sex. But the next book we're dealing with, because we hope to do 20 volumes that are the definitive look at our generation, who we are and how we got to be this way, is all about the history of music. It's called Tried to Rock. And it's a sonic history of American music as told by the bands that never made it. So kind of high school bands, college bands that practiced in rec rooms, suburban basements, churches and the like. And for that one, the sex breakdown is definitely more masculine right now. So any female listeners who were influenced by the Bangles or by Susie and the Banshees or Blondie, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, I promise we'll. I'm going to ask you about that a little later. So
were you in a band, Bob? Out of interest?
No. Never really accomplished playing an instrument very well. So no. But let's stay focused on camp for a minute. Roger, I'm not sure where you're from. I'm guessing it's not Manhattan.
You've got a good ear, a very good ear, Bob. I'm from Detroit.
Detroit.
I'm from Liverpool, England, actually.
Well, what part of Detroit is Liverpool?
It's the northwest of England part, and a long way away from New York City, where I live now.
So that may explain the chapter in the book that's devoted to how wonderful the English seem to be. Is that right?
I think I might be busted, Bob. I might be busted. The foreign counselor is an institution within Camp Life that is in there, but it's not in there because I happen to be English. I think if you went to camp, you would be very familiar with the normally quite sickly-looking English people who are imported en masse to do the dirty work, the kitchen work, or to be soccer counselors. And that's how I actually first came over to America. I was born in Liverpool, which was quite a place to grow up. It was very vibrant culturally, but economically it was in the 80s under Mrs. Thatcher. It was a pretty dark spot, and the American television shows that we were fed, Starsky and Hutch, Fantasy Island, Heart to Heart, and the light made America seem this incredibly vibrant, colourful place which we all longed to come to, and summer camp was often the mechanism that allowed us to come over here. And although we perhaps imagined that we'd be spending the summer walking around with Huggy Bear and the characters of Starsky and Hutch, we were kind of whisked off to the backwoods of Maine to work in summer camps, and I was. And what we found there either was appalling to the English people, they were either shocked to be out of the urban milieu, or in my case, I was blown away by what I found, this incredible universe that was run by and populated, run by kids, populated by kids, and it kind of made me think, as the subtitle of the book, it was like Fantasy Island meets Lord of the Flies, and I was blown away. But I think only a foreigner could really appreciate an American institution like camp from afar, like it. Perhaps de Tocqueville, it could be the only gent who could really appreciate democracy. And it's my blessing in life to be the de Tocqueville of bar mitzvahs, summer camp, and its ilk.
I'm looking at the section on the foreign counselors, and there's a picture of a very Jewish-looking girl pointing to the muscles on a guy wearing a World Gym shirt, half shirt, whatever it is, and it says his name was Skunk, and he was from just outside Liverpool, where they breed them big, and Gold's Gym was still a booming business.
I'm from just outside of Liverpool, and unfortunately I wasn't bred as big as Skunk, but he's a very fetching specimen, and we'll leave it at that.
Now, my wife looked at the book, and her first comment was, it's very Jewish. She seemed to think that a lot of the kids looked Jewish, a lot of the stories were Jewish, the names were Jewish, the camps seemed to be Jewish. Is that an overstatement, or is that on target here?
I think that there's a lot of Jewish kids who do camp, and camping is a vital part of the infrastructure that the Jewish community set up here. But many, and I think the majority of these camps are kind of privately owned camps, which are a reflection of a 4-generation journey from the city to the suburbs. And I think there is a history of our generation that's told through the thread of both Bar Mitzvah Disco and Camp, and it is the final part of a 4-generation tale. There's from the city to the suburbs, from tradition to modernity, and in many cases from poverty to affluence. And that happens to be a very Jewish story, but it's not solely Jewish. And well, there's definitely a healthy representation. I'd say it's more a suburban American story that I think we've captured here, amidst the story of the rise of Nike Airs, the rise of the World Wrestling Federation, Live Aid, the move from Walkmans and boomboxes, and the music that came out of them. That's really the tale that we've tried to capture here, and I think it's an extremely suburban one, Bob.
So the fact that I'm Jewish and never went to summer camp, do I face a lifetime of ostracism from the tribe?
I think that's a question to ask your rabbi, Bob. And so I'd encourage you to have him or her on as a guest on the show. But I was struck. I mean, after Bar Mitzvah Disco, we definitely thought we were doing a book that was more universal than the first one, and I think it's as Jewish, arguably as Bar Mitzvah Disco. And at the end of the day, it's just a very, very suburban story, and few communities reflect that tale more than the Jewish community.
I'm afraid I have to interrupt you for a second, Roger. There's an announcement coming in over the PA.
Great.
Attention campers! Remember, this is killer bee season in the Northwoods, so don't provoke any flying yellow things. You're just asking for trouble.
Do you have any favorite stories from the book yourself?
I have so many, to be honest. It took 3 years to do, and we did 300 interviews, really trying to capture the similarities, but more the discrete differences between camps, which is really where the rub is. There's vast differences between each camp. We interviewed, for instance, just if you look at all girls' camps, we interviewed girls' camps where boys were not really mentioned and were definitely not missed, where the girls silversmithed all summer and played the harp. We interviewed all girls' camps where it was all about the night time, where they spent all day literally shaving their legs, putting on the perfume and waiting for the boys to arrive at the evening. And the latter have all gone into book publishing. The former are all in book publishing, and the latter have all gone into the fashion industry. So we really tried to capture the discrete differences between camps. But if any of the stories stand out, I think it's probably one by Rebecca Shapiro, where she talks about falling in love with the English counsellor and her summer of deep passion and a love like no other, and what happens to her when she tries to follow up after camp and go and back to England to see him in his real milieu. And one of the things I found fascinating about listening to that story is that for so many individuals who are now happily married and have kids, they can hold in almost an emotional kind of vault the relationships that occurred at camp, and they never die, as opposed to kind of a long-term serious relationship that happened when you were 20, 22, 23, which you don't hold to be in such a nostalgic time. The camp relationships never die, and to hold those relationships in such a remarkably happy place was one that I heard over and over and over again. The joy of the camp crush, which far outweighs the kind of emotional presence of any other relationship,
Roger?
prior or former. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I lost you for a second there. Were there many stories that did not make the book?
Yeah, I mean, we received, as I say, over 80,000 photographs, and editing them down is kind of like editing a documentary movie. We go into a room with no walls, with no windows, and put as many of the images as we can up on the walls, and literally try and whittle them down so they both are kind of beautiful in themselves. And I do think many of the photographs, even though they were shot with a Kodak disc camera and have the graininess of the era, many of them do have the beauty of kind of a Leibovitz or a Mapplethorpe photograph, and they should be in the Smithsonian, but also to try and narrate an overarching story which tells kind of there's a collective thread, a motif that runs through the whole book.
Well, I guess what I was kind of getting at was, what about the stories that you could not tell in the book? Maybe they were just too disgusting or too graphic. I imagine there were some of those. Yeah,
there was a number of stories which were incredibly graphic, emotionally and kind of physically, and we've definitely tried to put as many in as possible. But the people who are buying the book are both individuals who either sent their kids to camp, kind of the parents back of the day, the kids of the day, but the book has got a healthy following from kind of 16, 17-year-old kids who pick it up off Facebook, where there's hundreds of groups of people who are currently so besotted with camp that they just can't stand the 10 months when they're not there. And so we've definitely tried to use a filter to make sure that it's somewhat multi-generational.
Right.
But we're still getting hundreds of stories in over the transom via the website, and we're just calmly and patiently posting as many as we can every day.
All right. Roger, I think we've got a call here for you. Hi, do you have a question or a comment for Roger Bennett?
Am I on?
You are on the air.
Oh, wow. Okay, sorry. Hey, I was checking out the camp website, and I got turned on to this other thing. Is this something you're doing as well? For those who try to rock, which is something kind of similar to the camp thing, but a different kind of a style?
Go ahead, Roger. You can answer that.
Yeah, sorry, what's your name?
My name is John.
John, it's good to speak to you. The book, Camp, is one of what I hope ultimately will be kind of a multi-volume history of our generation that truly proves that our generation are the greatest generation, despite what those who can come before them try and claim. And the one that you're talking about is actually the next in the series. It's a book that's looking closer at the music of our generation. The Camp book is definitely soaked in music. It sounds at times, it seems at times as if the Jay Giles band Freeze Frame is vaguely audible just out of shot of almost every one of the photographs. But the book was so soaked in music that we've decided to make the next volume purely a sonic history of American music as told by bands that never made it. And the website just launched a couple of weeks ago, and thanks to being picked up by sites like Thrillist and Rolling Stone have given it a gorgeous shout out and Metafilter. I think we've had a couple of hundred fans already who are now, by being on the website, bigger now than they ever were when they were together. But our goal with this project is to literally get thousands of bands and who were influenced when, for instance, Pavement first brought out their album, or they first heard the Smiths, or even Poison, and they were motivated to pick up a guitar and put a band together, whether that band lasted for a week or a month or even a year. We want to try and get thousands of each kind of ilk, so we can compare like with like and focus in on those discrete differences that will show over a span of thousands of stories exactly how music has evolved in this country. Were you in a band, John?
I was, but just for like a second. It didn't really work out that well.
Well, I mean, that frankly probably makes it all the more interesting. What was the story then?
Oh, it was just a kind of a high school, like, you know, I don't think we really knew how to play, but I don't think it's worth really talking about. But ultimately, that our drummer was asked by his mother not to be a part of it anymore because she didn't really like what we were up to, even though it was really nothing. So.
Well, I think, but
we loved Duran, and we rocked for about a minute.
I think in every story, with every mother, there's something deeper to be told. So I will love to hear from you. Just tell us the band's name.
The band's name was Evil Child.
I think it's time we got Evil Child back together, John.
By the way, I just want to say I picked up the book this weekend, just looked around at it, and there's that picture of everybody naked holding a boombox. There's like about 15 kids holding boomboxes naked. I cracked up. I laughed out loud. It was amazing.
Every time I look at that photograph, I notice a different detail. So I hope it's a gift that keeps on giving. That.
Do you mind if I ask this one more question, then I'll leave you alone?
No, go right ahead.
There is a card in the book which says "Dear Mike," and then like a little, like, you know, the standard like regular card you buy to store greeting. Just wanted to let you know I was thinking about you, and then it said "Love, Mom." The most pathetic thing you could ever get. Is that real?
The card.
Yeah, I mean, is that real? Is that true?
All this stuff is real, and the guy who submitted that, who's a remarkable gentleman called Mark Miller in New York City.
Mark, sorry.
He very graciously allowed us to reproduce both of the cards from his mother, who wrote a couple of cards where she just kind of signed them but didn't add a message, and made us write in the acknowledgements that thanks to Sonia Miller, mother of Mark, for having a sense of humor, letting us use the letters on pages 126 and 127, which are belied by the fact that she's an amazing mother who did write to her son a lot.
Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for calling, John.
Oh, thanks for having me.
That's funny. I held up, for those who are tuned into the webcast, I held up the picture of the guys who are without clothing and holding up boom boxes in front of their private parts.
I mean, it is a remarkable photograph, and the details in it, as I say, every time I look at it, I do see something different. Why is only one of the kids wearing a pair of sneakers, and the gentleman on the left is actually not holding up a boombox, but is wearing a kind of a pinny which has got the Playboy logo on the left, and I'm sure it's some kind of a cryptic message through the generations, and I'd love to know exactly what was going on and the thoughts that were behind it. But if any photograph perfectly captures the adolescent experience of being 16 or 17 and what it felt like back then in the early 80s, I defy you to find a greater photograph, and I just wish that the Smithsonian would hang a huge copy of that up in one of their permanent collections. Maybe you'll have better luck getting that to happen in Liverpool, my friend. I don't know that that's going to happen here. I'm sorry. Tripper wants to cut in for a minute. Hold on.
But the real excitement, of course, is going to come at the end of the summer, during Sexual Awareness Week. We import 200 hookers from around the world, and each camper, armed with only a thermos of coffee and $2,000 cash, tries to visit as many countries as he can. And the winner, of course, is named King of Sexual Awareness Week and is allowed to rape and pillage the neighboring towns until camp ends. So, Roger, tell me what your problem with Phil Collins is. Oh, you've got a very good eye, Bob. I think Phil Collins just symbolizes everything that's bad to me in terms of taste, and I'm sure he's a listener to the show, and I would love to. I'd love to fight him for charity. And so I think growing up, he was just a totem of a gentleman that started off wonderfully. Some of the stuff that he did when he was in Genesis was just absolutely delightful, and then lost his way. And I think around Easy Love, I'm not alone in this, but I think if he did come to Liverpool, he shouldn't get out the car. There's a whole city that would love to do him. But that's it. We just put that in the back of the book to really make sure that interviewers read the whole thing. So you passed with flying colours, Bob. I passed the test. That's good. I personally can't stand the man's music, but I don't usually start a conversation with it. But since you had it in there, he's kind of a gratingly smug character, and I think that's ultimately what the detail is. But you should have him on the show, and then maybe you can we can have a little go in the ring for charity. All right. Well, Phil, we know you're out there listening because you have nothing better to do today. So call in. We'll set you up with the charity of his choice. Go on. Yeah. I want to read another excerpt from the book here. This is actually there's two on this page. One I'm hesitant to read because I'm afraid someone's going to tune in the middle and think it's me. So let me read one first. You should make me read the other one, Bob. All right. Do you have a copy of the book in front of you? Go on. All right. Turn to page 196. You're going to read the one at the top, and I'm going to read the one below. Sure. While you pull that up, this is from Alex Grossman, who went to Camp Tamarack in Ortonville. Let's see, what is MI? Is that Michigan? Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, Michigan. Mm-hmm. listen, look who's asking who for the to know what the initials stand. Okay, this is from Alex Grossman. 7th grade. I convinced the girls' bunk to do an early-stage breast cancer screening. We were all going into 8th grade. We had hormones that were out of control. I blurted out that they all needed to get ready for me to fill them up and screen them. Voluptuous or flat, they were all amenable. Oh, Alex, you are my hero. And now, if you would, Roger, I'd like you to read the letter from Ariel Relbrook.
who went to Camp Echo Lark in Pointel, Pennsylvania.
I'll happily do so, and I'm delighted that this is a radio podcast and not a visual one, because I will be blushing as I read this beauty. Ariel writes, I was a sexual being at camp who did things I would never do at home in high school. I went out with a guy called Mike who was 3 years older, which was way older when you were 14. He was hot to me because everyone said he was hot. We ended up in the make-out spot by the hip-hop classroom and hooked up. I was in the middle of giving him a hand job when he said, not quite, and left me there on my own, devastated. I went back to the bunk and told my best friend, the popular Natasha. I woke up in the morning feeling as if my life was over. Natasha burst into our room laughing. I was like, what happened? She said she went out and met Mike, went down to the waterfront, told him to take off his shirt. He took off his shirt. Told him to take off his pants, and he did. Boxers? Did. And now I'm not going to do anything to you. She left him standing there on his own, naked. That's a camp friendship right there. And that's camp in a nutshell. 1 minute you feel like your life is over. The next you feel all powerful. And your mum never hears about anything. As I said, Bob, this is all very friendly for the under 16 set.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wait a minute. What's this?
I want you guys to go out there and protect your balls at any cost.
Okay. Thank you. Sometimes the audio clips work right when you expect them to, and sometimes they take a moment. So, I mean, is it all about sex? I mean, is that really all the stories that you heard and all the people you talked to, is sex still kind of the overwhelming touchstone that they all come back to?
I think it's a trend, a fad that never goes away, sex, Bob. I think it was a cornerstone formative part of the camping experience, because, I mean, the bar mitzvah was the perfect storm of awkwardness in that your parents, your family, your friends were all thrown together and the spotlight was shined upon you. Here, the parents were removed from the equation. You were literally let loose in a bunk of peers whose hormones were all popping, knowing that there were girls there or thereabout, and vice versa. And so obviously the second base, third base, and beyond action was a formative part of the camp experience. But I think the book really does document the full glories from sporting joys, the thrill of some of the theatre at camp, which only exists in camp. We say there's Broadway, there's off Broadway, and then there's kind of camp theatre. And someone wrote in with the most remarkable piece of theatre, which I only wish they'd videoed, which was they adapted Elie Wiesel's Night and set it to the music of Billy Joel, which I know now actually if they still have the script, they could probably get an off-Broadway slot for the stuff. But I think sex was an important ingredient, but I think it was just one of many, whether it was the arts and crafts room, the kind of inter-camp basketball games for both boys and girls, which were detailed in exquisite detail, the joys of tie-dyeing, and also the joys of hanging out just with your own sex, the deep kind of inclusion that occurs only at camp, and that formative bonds that are developed between boys in the bunk and girls in the bunk, and the culture that they create, which is kind of evidenced by the return of Sweet Valley High books recently. They were just rebranded and they're doing unbelievably well. It's a book about fashion, style, and music, but one of my favorite entries really is one that goes back to your question about sex, which is we were sent the purity test, which was a major part of many girls' bunk experiences. It's a list, and I don't know if you saw it, Bob, of 99 questions about what you've done to members of the opposite sex, and it starts off relatively pure with question number 1, have you ever, number 1, had a date? Number 2, been on a date past 4 a.m. 3, had a blind date, but pretty soon you're down in the 80s to, have you ever picked up a anonymous member of the opposite sex for sexual enjoyment, engaged in group sex, committed bestiality, committed rape, or been raped? And the girl said that we would take this every night through the 8 weeks of camp. At the beginning, your score would start at a virginal 83, and steadily plummet throughout the summer till you were down in the low 60s. And so if there's one document which does kind of sum up the camp experience, it would be these 99 questions. It's actually worth taking them yourself, Bob.
Yeah, let's set up another hour to do that.
With or without your rabbi, Bob.
Yeah. we'll skip that part, I think. There was I can't find it right now. You probably know where it is.
Go on.
It's not really necessary, I guess, but there was a story I think that a counselor told about how inexperienced some of the kids would be, and one of the boys had. Do you know what I'm talking about? One of the boys
Mick Moore.
Flipped off.
Yeah, there's a gentleman called Mick Moore who, the counsellors are demigods of camp, and that was one of the things I found most fascinating. One of the people we interviewed said she wised up pretty quickly that camp was all about the counsellors, made for the counsellors, and that their lives were soap operas that the rest of the kids followed throughout the year, their hookups, their breakups, what went down at the bar at night, when they'd come back drunk and tell their tales of excitement. You'd literally be thrilled by their stories, and you'd listen to every word and then decode exactly what the strange sexual terms meant, or try to decode them in the morning. And there was one counsellor, Mick Moore, who wrote about Camp Tel Yehuda. That sounds like an amazing place in Berryville, New York. He said, my campers were suburban kids who'd never been laid before. They talked a load of bullshit on the subject. And one night a kid came back to the bunk at 2 a.m., woke me up. He was terrified. He'd gone to the benches, which was the spot where kids went to make out, and ended up having sex with a 14-year-old camper. The kid had no idea about what he was doing. AIDS was massive, a massive, massive deal. And he had no clue whether his condom had worked or not. In fact, he had no idea how a condom worked at all. He had it in hand, fully loaded, and wanted me to check it to assure him that it had done its duty.
And you know what? It just sounded so real to me. It's so ridiculous and yet so real.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this experience kind of just underlines the deep and profound role that thousands of counsellors had on the lives of the kids in whose hands they were in. And one of the more remarkable experiences of doing the book is realizing that already, as I said earlier, the history that it documents is no longer in it. A little bit is no longer kind of relevant. This book, I think, when you show it to a 16, 17-year-old, it's funny to sit back and watch their reaction. It was the same reaction I had when my dad would show me pictures of kind of the Victorian age. I'd say that's very interesting, and I kind of scratch my head and see how much life had changed. But secondly, how many people who are in the book have already sadly passed away? There's a counsellor in the book. There's 3 or 4 people in the book who, even in their 30s, are no longer with us. And there's one on the Mick Moore page, a remarkable gentleman, by all accounts, called John Gooby Goldberg, who was the hottest, strongest, coolest guy ever at Camp Harlem. He was the Jewish Jim Thorpe.
I read that one.
He could take on any counsellor from any camp anywhere, mano mano. We knew that if Gooby went down, we all went down. He was our last line of defense against the townies of Kresgeville who would terrorize us after nightfall with their ATVs and pickups when they sped around camp after 1 a.m. He goes on and describes this gentleman, and while we were doing the book, John Goldberg passed away, I think at the age of 37. So as funny as some of these stories are, in doing the book and realizing that already at what is a relatively younger age, there's a number of people who are no longer with us. It gives the mission of the book, which is to some extent asking our generation to think about who they are, what they've inherited, and how they got to be this way, a little bit more of a sense of urgency than they would otherwise have.
Do you find, if you even track this, that is camp much different today because of things like the internet? I mean,
absolutely.
the people that told you stories in the book never had any fear that pictures of them or these pictures would wind up flashed around the world the next day. But and today, I'd imagine that could happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on camp today, but we've worked with so many camps across the country who've been remarkable. I've definitely gleaned an understanding of how things have changed. I think for me, the book is about summer camp, and it's not about summer camp, but to many people, they see it as a real love letter to the summer camping movement, in particular, an era that doesn't exist anymore. And as I understand it, camp is more popular today than ever. There's more kids going to camp than ever before, but it has changed remarkably. You no longer go to a summer camp where the specialty, as in this book, is kind of in hanging around and just hanging out down at the volleyball court, getting a back rub and waiting for the night time to occur. Camps are more specialty driven and niche now. So you go to an extreme sports camp or intense Chinese language or kind of tap dancing, whatever your passion is or whatever your parents would like your passion to be. That's how you spend your summer. And then the second issue is one about the length of time. The camping era that we document, 8 weeks was pretty standard, which was kind of the time that would take your parents to do a royal tour of Europe while you were out in the backwoods in New Hampshire, Maine, or kind of parts of California. And nowadays, parents prefer their kids to go away for a shorter period of time and travel and see the world with them. But the third change is, as you've identified, there's an amazing organization called Bunk One, who are a couple of guys at the New York base who've used the internet in the most thoughtful and creative way to try and eliminate what I think is another central emotion that lies through this book. As free and as opportunity-driven as camp was, and however giddy you were to experience the freedom and opportunity, it was also fused with an intense sense of homesickness and longing, in many, many cases, longing for home. And Bunk One uses the power of the internet and both photography and video to make sure that parents can keep in consistent contact and see what their kids are doing and vice versa, without actually making it so intrusive that you never feel like you have the freedom to leave home. And so, yeah, the internet has changed the relationship between home and camp, between parents and their kids, and I think brought them closer together, even while they're apart.
But I suspect that the flagpole...
Attention, there is a very fat pair of pants hanging on the flagpole this morning.
I just can't resist, I found the sounds and I got to share them.
Listening to them just kind of reaffirms the need that there is for somebody to step forward and make a great camp movie for our generation. I think the last great piece of camp film that I'm aware of was David Wayne's Wet Hot American Summer. That was pretty brilliant. And then obviously before that there was Meatballs, and I think there's definitely a challenge in writing a camp movie that captures all of the experiences that have happened in the many, many different places that are the compressed universes of camps. But I think the time listening to that just makes me want to set off and work on that kind of a project.
It would seem like, I was going to ask you, if no one has stepped forth to option camp yet for a film, I'm kind of surprised.
I leave that to the people who do the agenting for that kind of a piece, and I know that there's been a fair amount of interest, and we'll see what will occur.
Well, that makes sense. Wait, one more here.
Dad.
He's a sex machine.
Are you kidding me?
Well, I went out with him one night, and he got us 6 nurses by himself, and 4 of them couldn't report to work the next morning.
All right, that's a little off topic, but it is from Meatballs. So your newest project we've referred to a couple times, but we should probably kind of wind down here. Sure. Is Tried to Rock, and you are hoping that people will contact you through the website at this point with
Absolutely.
Their stories?
I mean, the response has been terrific, and the kind of web pickup that it's had has been really quite impressive, and the kind of stories we're looking for, I just want to underline, literally are if your band was together for a week, that's as important to us as if they kind of were together for several years and then evaporated when people left college. We love the band that played one gig is fascinating to us in terms of the vision, the big dreams, the ambition that they had as the the groups who thought they were really going to make it, because the era that we're documenting is an era when the record industry still worked, which it doesn't anymore, and you can have Panic at the Disco, or you can have the Arctic Monkeys, who can use the power of MySpace to really build an audience with or without a record label. But back when we grew up, you listened to pretty well what the record industry wanted you to listen to. And so we're fascinated by bands that came together with big dreams, but frankly very little chance of ever making it, because the system was so powerful and very few of them ever had a chance. So it's those tales that we're looking for, and we've received gorgeous photographs, which I think really portray the rightness of the adolescent experience, as well as some MP3s, some of which sound unbelievably good and make you realize how slim the line was between bands making it and bands that didn't. And some of them are unlistenable, which is part of the fun. But we're determined to shine the spotlight that all of these bands merited, but most of them never got, and give them the chance to have a reunion tour and really make the public pay for their product even 25 years on.
Well, folks, you can learn more about Roger Bennett's new book, Camp, at his website, www.campbook.com. It's campbook, one word, .com. Yeah, it's a little confusing, and I noticed on the website I actually typed in camp 3 times, so it's two camps and book. You can also order a copy of either of Roger's books, Camp or Disco Bar Mitzvah, online at MrMedia.com and Amazon.com. And Roger, thanks so much. I wish you and your wife well. I hope that minutes after getting off the phone with me, she'll go into labor, and you guys everything will go well, and you'll have a new camper on your way.
I am headed off to the hospital. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm grateful for you for having us on the show.
Appreciate your wife holding out the extra hour. Thanks a lot, and good luck.
Thank you, Bob.
All right, bye-bye.
Important announcement. Some hunters have been seen in the woods near Piney Ridge Trail, and the Fish and Game Commission has raised the legal kill limit on campers to 3. So if you're hiking today, please wear something bright and keep low. Good luck.
For dozens more celebrity and media newsmaker interviews, surf over to our main website, www.mrmedia.com. That's where you can listen to my conversations with the stars and creators and producers of Army Wives, 24, The Big Bang Theory, In Search of Kennedy, Pearls Before Swine, Tell Me You Love Me, The Dark Knight, Will Eisner's The Spirit, and many others. And please, I'm begging you, think about writing an online review of Mr. Media or marking Mr. Media as one of your favorites, whether you listen to us on Blog Talk Radio, Blueberry, Zencast, Odeo, Digital Journal, which is new, or iTunes. And everybody, thanks so much for sharing a piece of your day with me today on Mr. Media. Appreciate the time and the time you give up for us, and I hope you come back again real soon.